Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. A Harlem man was arrested and charged with murder after officers found dismembered body parts in his freezer.
Twisted tale of murder. An ex-con turned criminal justice reform activist caught, police say, with a head in his freezer. Police say Sheldon Johnson killed the victim at the victim's apartment in the Bronx, dismembered the body, and then carried some of the body parts back to his home in Harlem. Eyewitness News reporter Stefan Cam live outside that apartment in Harlem. Stefan.
Well, Sandra, Tuesday, cops found a torso and arms inside a Bronx apartment. Yesterday, they found the victim's head and legs inside a 9th floor apartment here in Harlem. The suspect is an ex-con who today works as a criminal justice reform advocate. 48-year-old Sheldon Johnson walking out of the 44th precinct in handcuffs in a Tyvek suit. Cops say he's the man behind a gory homicide, charged with murder, manslaughter, and criminal possession of a weapon. But Johnson says they have the wrong man.
I'm innocent.
He's accused of dismembering a body. The victim, 44-year-old Colin Small. Tuesday night, police found his torso and arms inside his apartment in the High Bridge section of the Bronx as they were responding to a wellness check, sending shivers through the building.
It feels like the devil just crawled through here.
Last night, investigators say they found the victim's head and legs in Johnson's freezer at his Harlem apartment on 5th Avenue. The medical examiner says the victim was shot once in the head, leading to the murder charge. Detectives also found a Tyvek suit in Johnson's car. He served about 25 years behind bars for attempted murder and has a long rap sheet filled with other violent crimes. He appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast last month, where he talked about how he turned his life around.
I had a wife, I had family still, my son was growing up. He was hearing stories about my so-called notoriety, and I just didn't want to be that dad.
Johnson went on to talk about being a former gang member, and when he was released from prison, he says he chose to walk away from that life.
Got my GED. I left the gangs alone, which was a benefit for them because, you know, I was what you call an authoritarian. I was a rule guy. I'm still a rule guy. I like rules. You know, I like rules. I like structure.
Johnson is expected to be arraigned tonight in Bronx criminal court. Reporting live in Harlem, Stefan Kim, Channel 7, Eyewitness News.
Now, according to reports, 48-year-old Sheldon Johnson was arrested in connection with the murder and dismemberment of Colin Small, an acquaintance from his days in prison. Now, Sheldon Johnson had previously done 20 years in prison for attempted murder and robbery, and had started to make efforts to turn his life around, and was currently working for the Queens Public Defender's Office as a youth counselor. And as he was working as a youth counselor, Sheldon Johnson made an appearance on the Joe Rogan show to talk about how he had turned his life around. And as he talked about how he turned his life around, he talked about how he is teaching young people about critical thinking and conflict resolution. Unfortunately, when he got into an encounter with Colin Small, a former acquaintance from prison, sadly, everything that he tried to teach his at-risk youth, sadly, he did not apply in his own life. And unfortunately, as he got involved with this acquaintance at his High Bridge apartment, there had to have been some sort of argument or altercation, and as a result, Sheldon Johnson allegedly wound up shooting Colin Small 2 times, which his neighbors heard. And after his neighbors heard those shots and did not see Colin Small for an extended period of time, this is where they called police, who came to that High Bridge apartment and found Sheldon Johnson inside of that Summit Avenue apartment with a torso minus the head and arms, and this is where the police took him into custody. And after taking Sheldon Johnson into custody, what they found in his Harlem apartment was the head and arms of Colin Small. Now, the police here in New York are seeing this as an isolated incident that is quite gruesome, but when I take a critical examination of the alleged behavior of Sheldon Johnson, it fits the pattern and profile for beta males that I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis. And it's clear to me that while Sheldon Johnson did make great efforts to turn his life around, he still wound up on the road to being a man in crisis because he made one major mistake. He returned to the ghetto. Now, Sheldon Johnson, after turning his life around, should have never looked back at the ghetto, because when you look back at the ghetto, what will happen is you'll wind up in a situation where you're dealing with people who are crabs in a bucket. And basically, I believe what happened with Sheldon Johnson is he got into this situation where he was talking to this guy he knew from his past, Colin Small, and he possibly invited him to come to his house, and that invitation was a major mistake, because if you've got your life in order, you just don't go back to chaos. And you don't go back to chaos because what chaos will do is bring you back to a chaotic situation. And that's basically what I believe happened to Sheldon Johnson. He wound up going back to that Bronx apartment, possibly wound up getting into it with Colin Small, who may have or may not have watched his Joe Rogan appearance and started taking shots at him. And then, acting on impulse, what happened with Sheldon Johnson is he acted impulsively, and as he acted impulsively, reacting to whatever this dude had said or did, this basically led to him winding up going from being a man who was turning his life around to making a turn that would take him back to the penitentiary. And he wound up on that path because, sadly, he wound up, while he was preaching things to most of those at-risk youth, he wasn't learning how to practice it in his life, because a man has to understand that when he's out here, he has to understand that as part of his male life skills, you have to practice this every day. You have to practice critical thinking, conflict resolution, and you have to have a good awareness of self to learn how to avoid certain situations. And one of the smart things that a critical thinker has to do as a man, as part of his male survival skills, is understand to stay out of situations that can put your intangibles at risk. And you really have to make a serious effort to protect your freedom. And sadly, Sheldon Johnson didn't really understand that you have to protect your freedom at all costs. When it comes to these folks out here, you have to protect your freedom, and part of protecting your freedom is keeping distance from folks from your past, because those folks will make efforts to try to sabotage your future. And Sheldon Johnson didn't understand that at all. And sadly, what he did was go meet with this guy, Colin Small, not understanding meeting with people from your past will lead to you having your future jammed up. And you'll get your future jammed up because, again, folks out here don't like to see a man out here having success and doing well. No, there's a lot of jealous folks out there, and a lot of jealous folks out there, they don't want to see you doing well. So that's why smart guys who come from the places like I do, like the South Bronx, what we do is once you get your money up, you get far away from those people, because those people will drag you down and they will want to see you at the bottom of the world. And that's why you got to stay, in order to stay where you at, you got to leave them where you find them. But sadly, Sheldon Johnson basically went to that Highbridge apartment, and whatever happened in that apartment led to him taking out a firearm, which he possibly should not have had as an ex-offender, and winding up allegedly shooting Colin Small 2 times. And what I believe happened with Sheldon Johnson after participating in the murder of Colin Small is that he wound up becoming paranoid, And as he became paranoid, he wanted to try to make his world smooth by trying to get rid of the evidence. And this is where he started to go out and put on all sorts of crazy disguises and wigs, hoping that people would see him as completely different people. This was him acting in a paranoid fashion, afraid of basically getting caught, and ironically doing everything that would get him caught, because surveillance video basically shows him carrying a blue bin and cleaning agents, and this is video evidence that can be used in court against him, showing him wearing these wigs and wearing these different clothes to make himself look like somebody else. But people could clearly see that it was him, and once they do a luminol test and a DNA test on that bin and all of the things in that apartment, it's all going to lead to a paper trail to him. And if they can find blood on his hands from DNA, it's basically an open and shut case that makes it where a man who basically worked hard to turn his life around will be taking a U-turn straight back to the penitentiary if he's convicted. And instead of him making appearances on the Joe Rogan show, he will be making appearances on the Penitentiary Talent Show, where he will possibly be participating in a tap dance where he will be watched by Bubba, Tiny, Roscoe, Big Dave, Melvin, and Mr. Sprinkles, and then later going back to Cell Block D to provide them with a different kind of entertainment as they trade him for Little Debbie snack cakes, ramen noodles, packets of Crystal Light lemonade, packets of Crystal Light tea, packets of off-brand fruit punch, packets of lemonade, and off-brand Oreo cookies, off-brand lemon cookies, off-brand duplex cookies, off-brand chocolate chip cookies, off-brand butter cookies, off-brand ginger snaps, off-brand potato chips, off-brand tortilla chips, off-brand pretzels, and Hunt's snack pack puddings, and packets of soy sauce, packets of sriracha sauce, packets of mustard. I mean, basically they gonna turn that tight end into a wide receiver, and they're gonna be scoring touchdowns as they spit roast this dude who basically wound up blowing the opportunity to turn his life around, because now that he's basically possibly allegedly murdered this man and there's evidence of it, he's going to go from being a man who turned his life around to winding up doing the rest of his life in prison, and doing the rest of his life in prison because he didn't have the critical thinking to understand when you see dudes you knew from the past in the street, you leave them in the street. If you doing all right, you don't go back to the neighborhood, you don't go back to those people, because those people are gonna be crabs in a bucket, and those crabs in a bucket are gonna look to take you down. That's what any critical thinking man understands, and it was a hard lesson I had to learn when I was at Park West High School at 15 years old. I was looking to, after having a rough 2 years in junior high school, looking to try to get my life in order, when a guy from my past from elementary and junior high school started talking about what things that I did in the past in junior high school and high school that I was not really proud of. He decided to tell all my business, and that basically put me in a bad place. But after that experience, I learned that I just needed to cut my ties with people from the past if I wanted to focus on a future. I needed to cut ties with those people, because some people, they get jealous of you doing well, and what they want to do is cut you down. So you've got to be smart and say, look, I see this dude in the street, but I'm going to keep him in the street. I'm not going in his house nowhere, not going anywhere around him, because I have too much to lose. And the most important thing you have to lose in this world is your freedom, and you have to do everything to protect your freedom. That's what smart critical thinking men understand, because they understand you can't move yourself ahead if you don't have your freedom, and you have to avoid people who are crabs in a bucket, because they can take everything from you. So you have to understand, you have to stay away from people because they can put you in a situation that can jam you up only if you allow that to happen. And that's why you have to keep your distance from those kind of folks. And sadly, Sheldon Johnson, even though he got an education in counseling, sadly, because he didn't have male life skills or male survival skills to teach him critical thinking, he wound up acting impulsively by going to this guy's house and then acting even more impulsively by allegedly shooting him and dismembering him. And that took him from being in a world of success back on the road to failure, and sadly on the road to failure because he became his own worst enemy, because he didn't know how to navigate through his emotions. And because he didn't know how to navigate through his emotions, while he had anger at this guy for possibly digging up some old dirt, he acted impulsively on it and allegedly shot and killed this guy. And this basically led where he wound up in a situation where he went from being a guy helping at-risk youth to now being put at risk, as he's going to be dealing with having his tight end turned into a wide receiver, and will be in there getting spit roasted by Bubba, Tiny, Roscoe, Big Dave, Melvin, and Mr. Sprinkles as he's doing a life sentence in prison. And this man went from being a free man it was an example of turning your life around, to becoming a man in crisis. And sadly, this is what happens when you are a man who doesn't understand how to go out here and deal with people and situations. You go from being a man who has his freedom to a man in crisis back in the penitentiary. Now, if you want to learn how to avoid the situations like this and learn how the dysfunctional pattern that can take you on the road to becoming a man in crisis, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you want to see me make more videos about men in crisis, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.